The Maya got high on frog juice and drilled into skulls, yet their patients lived. Your dentist still needs 6 shots to numb your gum line. Ancient surgery was brutal, precise, and somehow effective. Egypt's medical manuals and mummification. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where medicine was part science, part magic, and fully terrifying. Doctors weren't just doctors. They were priests, exorcists, and part-time embalmers. Want a prescription? Better chant a spell while applying that honey. Yes, honey. The Egyptians smeared it on wounds like neosporin because it actually kills bacteria. That's not a joke. Modern science backed them up 4,000 years later. Their medical knowledge wasn't improvised. It was written down on papyrus scrolls with actual case studies. The Edwin Smith Papyrus is one of the oldest surgical manuals in the world. It describes 48 trauma cases, most from head injuries. One says, "This man has a gaping wound to the skull. Prognosis, unfavorable. Translation, he's toast." Then there's the Ebers Papyrus. Think of it as a CVS receipt that never ends. It lists over 700 remedies for everything from bad breath to disorder of the anus. Their go-to ingredients? Crocodile dung, crushed beetles, and moldy bread. And weirdly, some of it worked. Moldy bread contained penicillium, the same stuff that gave us penicillin. They didn't know why it worked. It just did. Now, let's talk mummies. The Egyptians were obsessed with preserving the body for the afterlife, which gave them a front-row seat to human anatomy. Want to know how they discovered the brain wasn't important? They yanked it out through the nose and tossed it. The heart, though, that was sacred. They left it inside, because according to them, it held your thoughts, feelings, and sins, not your brain. That was filler. Embalmers weren't guessing. They had tools, bronze hooks, resin, soaked linens, natron salts. Organs were stored in canopic jars, each with a different god's head on top. And if you thought this was limited to pharaohs, nope. Even middle-class Egyptians could get a budget version. Like the Costco of embalming, less gold, same creepy results. Bottom line, the Egyptians weren't playing. They practiced medicine with a blend of trial, error, and divine intervention. Some of their treatments were genius. Others were just crocodile poop. Either way, they were centuries ahead of everyone else. And they did it in linen skirts. Sumerian healing spells and clay tablets. Before hospitals, before Hippocrates, before anyone figured out soap, there were the Sumerians. Living in Mesopotamia around 2100 BCE, they were the first people to write stuff down, including how to treat a throbbing head, a bloated stomach, or a body full of demons. Spoiler, it involved a lot of plants, some mud, and yelling at the sky. In Sumer, illness wasn't a medical issue, but a personal offense to a god. You sinned? You got sick? You angered a spirit? Boom, diarrhea. Their doctors, called Azu, were more like magical pharmacists with serious anxiety. Step 1. Figure out which deity you offended. Step 2. Make it right with an offering. Step 3. Drink something awful and hope for the best. But here's the wild part. They didn't just pray. They documented. Thousands of clay tablets dug up in cities like Nippur and Lagash list treatments for snake bites, infections, tumors, and toothaches. One cure for a swollen hand? Crushed turtle shell, mashed figs, and a chant to the god Enki. Side effects may include still having a swollen hand. And it wasn't random. These texts show patterns. They grouped symptoms. They labeled body parts. Some even recommended diet changes, like switching to soft bread and goat's milk if your belly was acting up. That's right, ancient Sumerians invented bland food therapy. They also had pharmacological lists. Over 250 different ingredients are recorded, including willow bark, which contains salicin, a chemical cousin to aspirin. That's not luck, that's observation. The Sumerians might have believed in demons, but they also noticed when something actually worked. And then there were the spells. These were recited during treatments, and were not optional. One chant went, "May the hand of the ghost be removed. May the demon depart. May the bile settle." That's basically an ancient Yelp review. Felt a lot better after ghost removal. 5 stars. Doctors and priests worked side by side. One grinding up roots, the other screaming into incense smoke. A diagnosis might come from symptoms, or how you reacted to a sheep liver reading. Yes, divination via organs was totally a thing. So, were they right? Sometimes. Their methods were half logic, half cosmic guesswork, but make no mistake, this was the beginning of medicine, written in stone, literally. Ayurvedic foundations in the Indus Valley. Head west of Mesopotamia, and you hit the Indus Valley civilization, Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and a bunch of brick cities so clean they'd make modern city planners cry. These folks weren't just tidy, they were obsessed with hygiene. Long before anyone knew what bacteria were, they were flushing them out of town. Picture this, stone toilets in almost every home, drains running through the streets, and public bathhouses that actually worked. This wasn't luxury. It was urban health infrastructure in 2000 BCE. While Europe was still figuring out how to not eat dirt, the Indus people were scrubbing themselves daily. But here's where it gets deeper. This wasn't just about being clean. It was part of a larger health philosophy that would later evolve into Ayurveda, India's ancient system of medicine that's still around today. Back then, they didn't call it that yet, but the seeds were already planted. At the core of early Ayurvedic ideas were the three doshas: Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. Think of them as body energies. Too much of one? You're sick? Just enough? You're golden? The balance was controlled by everything: diet, sleep, weather, emotions, even the moon. If your stomach was angry, maybe your Vata was throwing a tantrum. And their treatments? Root-based. Literally, neem for skin problems, turmeric for inflammation, ashwagandha for stress before it had a name. Some plants were crushed, others boiled. Some you'd rub on your skin, others straight into your nose. Don't ask. They also believed in seasonal eating, daily routines, and fasting. Not for weight loss, but to reset your body's internal factory. They wrote about digestion, immunity, mental clarity, and aging. Basically, all the wellness influencers today are just remixing Indus Valley advice with better lighting. So while the West was curing disease with amulets and goat breath, the Indus Valley was running a wellness spa with actual plumbing. No hype, just clay pipes, herbs, and a serious skincare routine. Chinese pulse diagnosis and herbal lore. In Shang Dynasty China, a weird pulse in your wrist meant more than just bad circulation. It could mean your spleen was stressed, your qi was stuck, or your liver was throwing a tantrum again. Around 1600 BCE, during the Shang Dynasty, Chinese healers weren't cutting people open or yanking brains out through noses. They were reading pulses like palm readers, only smarter. They believed your body was run by qi, a kind of life energy that flowed through meridians. If it got stuck, boom, disease. No qi, no peace. But they didn't stop at vibes. They watched, they recorded, and they built a full-body operating manual, the foundations of what would become traditional Chinese medicine, TCM. It wasn't all superstition. Many of their treatments, especially herbal remedies, still show up in pharmacies today. Let's talk pulse. To them, it wasn't just fast or slow. There were 28 types of pulses. One throb might mean you're angry, another, your kidney's depressed. Yes, your kidney. Emotions were tied to organs. Anger lived in the liver, fear in the kidneys, grief in the lungs. So, if you were sad, your doctor might not tell you to cheer up. They'd give you herbs for your lungs. Speaking of herbs, their medicine cabinets were stuffed with roots, bark, flowers, and animal bits. Licorice root, ginseng, and ginger were powerhouses. Deer antler? That was like Red Bull. Tiger bone? Well, that one didn't age well. But they believed in harmony, yin and yang, hot and cold, bitter and sweet. Balance was everything. They also dabbled in acupuncture, using sharp stones and later bronze needles. Not randomly either. They mapped meridians like a subway system. And yes, they believed needling a toe could fix a headache. Laugh now, but modern researchers are still studying how those pressure points actually work. Ancient Chinese healers weren't butchers. They were listeners, observers. They treated your body like a garden, something to nourish, trim, and rebalance. And if that meant stabbing your foot to fix your lungs, that's just good medicine. Hittite plague protocols and isolation orders. The Hittites didn't just fear war, they feared plague. And when people started dropping like flies, they didn't light candles, they wrote policy. Sometime around 1400 BCE, a mysterious epidemic tore through the Hittite Empire. Bodies piled up, priests panicked, and the royal court got involved. This wasn't a minor rash. It was empire-level disaster. So what did the Hittites do? They documented the entire mess, with orders, rituals, and even travel bans. Yes, travel bans. Ancient ones, clay tablets found in Hattusa, their capital, revealed the closest thing the Bronze Age had to a CDC. There were specific instructions: isolate the sick, purify the space, sacrifice some goats, and under no circumstances let infected foreigners in. One text flat out says, "No one from Arzawa shall be allowed into the land of Hatti." Border control, activated. But this wasn't just about fear. The Hittites noticed patterns. Disease came with people. People came from war. Their king, Suppiluliuma I, had just conquered parts of Syria. And guess what showed up with the prisoners? Yep, the plague. A few months later, the king was dead. Coincidence? The scribes didn't think so. They also had cleaning rituals so intense, they'd put modern germaphobes to shame. Rooms were smoked with incense, floors washed with special water, and priests recited lines like, "Be gone, sickness, be gone." Simple, direct, slightly threatening. And the doctors? Forget herbs. These guys were ritual technicians. Their job wasn't to cure, it was to reset the cosmic balance. That meant spells, sacrifices, and total environmental cleansing. If someone sneezed wrong, it could trigger a 5-day purification cycle. It wasn't science the way we know it, but it was early epidemiology in action. They tracked outbreaks. They traced origins. They reacted fast. The Hittites didn't just pray, they took notes. And honestly, that puts them ahead of some modern governments. Greek rational medicine and the rise of Hippocrates. If you got sick in ancient Greece, it wasn't because a demon crawled into your ear. It was because your bile was in a bad mood. Welcome to the land of humorism, the grand medical theory that said your body was run by 4 fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If they were balanced, you were healthy. If not, diarrhea. Or worse. But here's the real twist. They stopped blaming the gods. Around 500 BCE, Greek thinkers, especially one guy named Hippocrates, flipped the script. Illness wasn't divine punishment anymore. It was natural, observable, and maybe even treatable. That shift? Huge. Hippocrates basically said, let's stop praying and start writing. His name is slapped onto the Hippocratic corpus, a massive collection of texts that laid the foundation for Western medicine. These scrolls talk about symptoms, prognosis, diet, and surgical techniques, like how to reset a dislocated shoulder or drain pus from an abscess. Did it still involve leeches and bleeding? Oh, absolutely. But now it came with instructions. Hippocrates also believed in something radical: bedside manner. Doctors should observe patients, ask questions, keep their hands clean, seriously, and not scream, "You're cursed," after 5 minutes. He even introduced patient confidentiality. Ancient Greece had HIPAA before HIPAA. The most famous part? The Hippocratic Oath. It wasn't exactly the version doctors recite today, but the original still packed a punch. Swear by Apollo, treat the sick to the best of your ability, and never give poison, even if asked. No euthanasia, no abortions, no cutting for bladder stones. That was outsourced to specialists. And always, always respect your teacher. You know, unless you wanted the gods to smite you. So no, they didn't cure everything. And yes, they still used a lot of vinegar and hope. But Hippocrates and his crew dragged medicine out of the temple and into the clinic. And honestly, that was the healthiest decision Greece ever made. Persian hospitals and mobile clinics. In the Achaemenid Empire, medicine wasn't just for priests or philosophers. It was an organized, state-backed operation with actual health infrastructure. A concept most other empires hadn't even sneezed on yet. The Persians, especially under rulers like Darius I, took health seriously. They ran traveling medical caravans, literal mobile clinics, loaded with herbs, ointments, and practitioners trained in Zoroastrian medical texts. These roving doctors would roll into cities, villages, even battlefields, delivering care like ancient EMTs in sandals. And they weren't improvising. The Avesta, Zoroastrianism's sacred text, included detailed descriptions of disease, healing, surgery, and sanitation. It said healing came in 3 forms: through the knife, through herbs, and through holy words. Yes, surgery, pharmacology, and therapy, in that order. That's how the Persians categorized medicine before most cultures had even figured out how to clean a wound without screaming. Persian cities like Susa and Ekbatana had actual hospitals, early versions of bimaristans, which would later evolve under Islamic rule. These weren't temples, they were facilities for the sick, staffed, supplied, sometimes even separated by illness type. If that sounds advanced, that's because it was. Doctors weren't freelancers either. They were trained, often state-employed, and licensed. That's right, bad diagnosis? You could be fined, or worse. The Persian Empire was a bureaucracy on steroids, and that included healthcare. Cleanliness was next to godliness, literally. Zoroastrians believed that contamination, especially from corpses or bodily fluids, was a form of spiritual pollution. So they built elaborate water systems, banned open defecation near water sources, and enforced hand-washing as a religious duty. Ancient Persia had health codes when the rest of the world was still arguing with thunder. Roman engineering and public health. Rome didn't just build roads. It built a health empire. The Romans believed a strong body made a strong soldier, and strong soldiers made a strong empire. So they treated public health the way they treated everything else. Aggressively, logically, and with way too much concrete. First up, aqueducts. Rome's pride and joy. These massive stone arteries delivered clean water from miles away into homes, baths, fountains, and latrines. By the 1st century BCE, the city of Rome had 11 aqueducts, pumping in over 200 million gallons of water per day. That wasn't just for show, it was survival. Next, public baths. The thermae weren't luxury spas, they were mandatory hygiene centers. Citizens scrubbed down daily, sweating out grime in steam rooms and rinsing in freezing pools. It wasn't optional. Dirty bodies meant disease, and Rome liked its people and its slaves sanitized. But Rome didn't stop at cleaning bodies. It cleaned streets too. The Cloaca Maxima, their giant sewer system, flushed waste out of the city. This was 2,000 years before Paris figured out how to handle poop. Romans weren't above filth, they just wanted it somewhere else. And then there were latrines, public ones, with running water. Some even had communal sponges on sticks, rinsed between users. Gross? Yes. But in Roman terms, hygienic innovation, healthcare for soldiers was especially advanced. Rome had military field hospitals, complete with surgical tools, triage protocols, and medical officers called medici. They performed amputations, stitched wounds, and treated infections with wine-soaked bandages. Battlefield ERs, Roman style. Enter Galen, the empire's medical superstar. A Greek physician working in Rome around the 2nd century CE, he wrote over 500 treatises on anatomy, surgery, and physiology. He dissected animals, pigs, monkeys, whatever he could get his hands on to understand the human body. He was wrong about a lot, thanks to not dissecting humans, but his theories ran Western medicine for over 1,300 years. And here's the kicker. Romans saw health as a civic duty. Build strong sewers, protect clean water, treat injuries fast, and your empire lasts longer. It wasn't compassion, it was strategy. Rome didn't invent medicine, but it scaled it. If cleanliness is next to godliness, Rome paved the road there in marble and called it infrastructure. Mayan surgery and hallucinogenic healing. Let's get one thing straight. The Maya weren't just astronomers and calendar freaks. They were hardcore body hackers, performing surgeries, modifying skulls, and prescribing drugs that would knock you sideways. In city-states like Tikal and Palenque, medicine was a combo of botany, blood, and the supernatural. Health wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, cosmic, and sometimes straight-up psychedelic. If your soul was out of sync, you didn't get a pill. You got a shaman, a hallucinogenic enema, and a prayer to a crocodile god. Yes, enemas. They used tubes carved from gourds or bones to deliver fast-acting herbal or psychoactive mixtures through the express route. Substances included tobacco, peyote, and a jungle brew called balshe, a fermented honey drink sometimes laced with tree bark and frogs. Not kidding. The goal? Purge, cleanse, reset. Ancient detox, Maya edition. But it wasn't all trippy rituals. The Maya practiced real surgery. Evidence from skeletal remains shows trepanation, drilling or scraping a hole in the skull to treat trauma or pressure. And many of those skulls show healing, which means some patients survived. That's not ritual, that's precision. They also mastered dental work. Jade, obsidian, and turquoise were drilled into teeth, not randomly, but with shockingly accurate technique. These weren't decorative stones glued on for show. They were carved, inlaid, and often filed into shape. No anesthesia, no Novocaine, just grit and a steady hand. Mayan healers, called Amen, were trained professionals. They memorized thousands of plant uses and knew which leaf to crush for a fever, which bark to brew for a cough, and which mushroom would make you talk to the underworld. Their botanical knowledge was so advanced that modern researchers are still finding parallels in contemporary medicine. They believed illness had causes: bad blood, broken energy, angry gods, or a breach in the spiritual world. Treatment was customized. A stomach bug might get you a cup of roasted cacao with chili and sap. A curse might need a chicken sacrifice and a sweat lodge ceremony. You didn't go to a Mayan healer just to get better. You went to realign yourself with the universe, or at least stop vomiting frogs. For the Maya, medicine wasn't trial and error. It was trial and trance. And somehow, it worked. Islamic Golden Age and the Medical Revolution. By the 9th century, while Europe was treating illness with prayers and leeches, the Islamic world was building universities, hospitals, and surgical libraries that would make modern med schools look lazy. Enter the Islamic Golden Age, a time when science wasn't just respected, it was funded, translated, copied, and leveled up. Cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo became medical powerhouses. And at the center of it all, a Persian genius named Ibn Sina, or, as the West calls him, Avicenna. His book, The Canon of Medicine, wasn't a casual read. It was 5 volumes, packed with over 1 million words and hundreds of diseases, diagnoses, treatments, and surgical procedures. It became Europe's go-to medical text for over 600 years. 600 years. But Avicenna wasn't alone. There was Al-Razi, Rhazes, who ran a hospital in Baghdad and wrote the first real guide to differentiating smallpox from measles. He also insisted on evidence-based treatment and rejected superstition. Radical idea: don't guess, test. Hospitals in the Islamic world weren't temples or death rooms. They were bimaristans. Free, public institutions with wards for specific diseases, medical records, pharmacies, and training centers for students. Patients were separated by condition. Doctors did rounds, and surgeons actually washed their hands. Hygiene was enforced. If a doctor messed up badly enough, they could be banned from practicing. They also required licensing exams. You couldn't just throw on a robe and start poking people. You had to study, train, and prove you weren't a butcher with a god complex. And if you prescribed mercury for a headache, you'd probably get booted. Doctors cataloged hundreds of drugs, from opium for pain to camphor for cooling fevers. Pharmacists were a real profession, and prescriptions had to be measured and written down. This was standardized medicine centuries before the term even existed. Mental health? Covered. There were psychiatric wards, with music therapy. In the 10th century, the point wasn't magic, it was method. These scholars preserved Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian medical texts, then tested, corrected, and expanded them. While Europe was still bleeding people with rusty blades, the Islamic world was running clinics with charts, ethics, and antiseptic rinse bowls. They didn't just heal bodies, they rewired the entire logic of medicine and left everyone else scrambling to catch up.